be seated. Doctor, the evidence you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth, and if so, raise your right hand and say, so help me God.
So help me God.
Counsel, we had started cross-examination, hadn't we?
Thank you, yes. Justice Moseneke. Justice Moseneke, my learned friend for Section 27 would just like to place something on record.
Very well.
Good morning, Justice Moseneke.
Good morning.
In Dr. Tala-tala's evidence in chief, he referred to the addition of 900 beds at existing psychiatric hospitals in the province. I asked leave to hand up the document that supports what he said, yes, as Exhibit ELAH 59.
Yes, indeed. Any objection by any of the parties to handing up of the document?
There's no objection,
no
to the handing up of the document.
No.
No objection.
No objection. Thank you. Thanks. ELAH 59 is admitted as an exhibit. Before cross-examination continues, I have been alerted that the either the evidence leaders or you, Advocate Hassan, is going to tell us something we don't know.
Let me take the responsibility, Justice Moseneke. It's in relation to a witness who has been mentioned throughout the proceedings from the beginning, that is Dr. Manamela. We have received communication from, that is on the 12th of this month, that she has reconsidered her position. She will be coming to testify during the course of next week. That is, the date will be the 20th, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's the 20th. Yes. She will be coming on the 20th, but the state has been requested to address communication back to her attorneys because there was a condition she had placed on her attendance. That is yet to be communicated to her later this afternoon. And
you know, I like direct speech, not indirect speech. We have received communication. That doesn't help. Somebody wrote to somebody and said something.
Justice Moseneke,
it's called direct speech.
Yes, on
the cat drinks the milk.
Yes.
The milk is drunk by the cat.
Apologies.
Okay.
Apologies. On the 12th of November, Dr. Manamela's attorneys, ACM attorneys, wrote correspondence. It was directed for my attention. I had responded to the email, accepting the undertaking to that is come and testify or to reconsider her position. She has undertook to come and testify from the 20th. That is on the date which has been indicated in the subpoena.
And the 20th would be Monday.
That is
coming next Monday.
That is Monday.
The 20th of November.
Yes. However, there is one issue that the state needs to address with her and her attorneys in relation to any interpretation of a clause, specifically clause 6.8 of the terms of reference relating to costs or payment of costs for the attendance of parties and witnesses and so on. And that is yet to be communicated to Dr. Manamela and her attorneys by the state later this afternoon. So insofar as that issue has been raised as well in the letter, I'm not in a position to address you further on it since it has not been dealt with by the state. So they have undertook to address that issue later in the afternoon. So once that issue shall have been addressed, then we'll be in a position to make further announcements in relation to it.
Advocate Hassan, you subpoenaed Dr. Manamela.
That's correct, Justice Moseneke. We did subpoena Dr. Manamela, and despite her initial objections, she's now, as my learned friend says, she's written to us via her attorneys to say she's reconsidered the position. She'll be here on the 20th of November. And we have requested the evidence leaders. Okay, I think we're back. We're back on.
Okay, very well.
I was saying that Dr. Manamela has reconsidered. She will be here on the 20th of November. Her evidence will be led by the evidence leaders. Her condition was that her costs of attendance and of her legal costs should be paid by the state. And in support of that request, she refers to paragraph 6.8 of the terms of reference. And that really is perhaps an issue on which my friend for the state would be best placed to address you on, and what the meaning of that is. We have a view on it, but it's really up to the state to decide whether they wish to pay her legal costs or not.
Very well. Advocate Krause, do you have anything to say about this?
I don't think
We're
that...
still talking about the witness, Dr. Manamela.
Justice Moseneke, I have a definite view on it, but I don't think that it's something that this forum have to decide at this stage.
No. Thank you. Counsel?
Yeah, we don't have any specific issue to raise at this point in time, Justice.
Advocate Utam. It all comes back to you, it seems to me.
Well, from the state, all that we can say is that it is on record that Dr. Manamela has been subpoenaed as a witness, and then she will have to be in attendance. Correspondence between the attorneys will be exchanged like in the normal course. So it's not a matter that is supposed to be subjected to these proceedings. It's on record that she's coming pursuant to a subpoena. So let's just leave it as it is.
Very well. I think that's good advice. Anything else that anybody would like to say about that particular matter? No, we're done. And we will see you on Monday morning. Advocate Krause? Your mic was on. Do you want to say anything else, Advocate Gojan?
No, nothing.
Yeah, very well.
Thank you, Justice Moseneke. Morning, Doctor.
Morning.
We were last speaking about the lack of water or over dehydration. I don't know whether you have an answer for the Justice on over hydration.
Yes, Counsel. I don't think it would be a problem for Justice because it was very hot yesterday. He may have been getting dehydrated, and that's why he needed to replenish the stores. But it could have some relevance for the psychiatric patients because part of the illness, they could actually, if you not supervise them, some of the patients may drink lots of water, and that lowers the chemicals called sodium in the blood, and that could result in seizures. So the danger is not only dehydration, it's also if they drink too much water, they're at risk of what is called hyponatremia, low sodium, and if not checked, it can cause seizures and death.
And doctor, that could perhaps explain people testifying about their family members having seizures who've never had seizures before. But it could also be the dehydration that caused that.
Yes. Both they could be.
Insofar as a lack of food is concerned, how will that affect a patient?
With food, that we also at various levels.
You talked about the increase in appetite yesterday.
Which they need. And also you need food to take your medications. But also if you then don't eat or you'll go into starvation, your blood sugar will go down. And you could die from the low blood sugar. It's also or starvation.
And a lack of food, would that make you non-responsive?
You mean in terms of
communication?
If the blood sugar goes down, you can become that is one of the signs of hypoglycemia. You can become non-responsive.
Yes. Doctor, we have heard evidence of, or we will still hear evidence as well, of people being cold, inappropriately dressed in winter, barefoot. How will that affect a mental health care user?
When you are looking after patients, especially of that severity, you actually need to control the environment in terms of temperature. Anyway, hospitals control temperature anyway for any patient, but for those kind of patients, you need to control, to have a heating system because they may not dress appropriately even when you've got the clothes, even at night, they may not cover themselves appropriately. So you need some kind of
more control than another adult.
Yes. I assume that if you are running an NGO, you may not have a heating system like they have at Stikfontein Hospital, but then you have to pay attention in making sure that they are dressed up warmly in winter and lightly in summer during hot days.
If we can move to the lack of hygiene, and we've dealt with it, and I will again deal with it with Takalani's report, but how will that influence the mental health of a mental health care user?
Firstly, the hygiene needs to be supervised, especially with patients of with that severity of illness. We need to supervise the hygiene, the washing of hands, the cleanliness of the environment. For any patient, there needs to be good hygiene because you'll spread infections from one person to the next, and that could result in infectious diseases, diarrheas, even respiratory diseases if it's an overcrowded place and without good hygiene and ventilation.
Are you saying that that could lead to respiratory diseases which was non-existent in the patient before?
Yes, they could have flus, they could have pneumonias. From one of the respiratory infection, an acute infection, not something the person may have had. There could also be spread of TB.
Yes. We've heard that the lack of hygiene actually goes further than not the washing of hands. We have heard evidence or opinion evidence that patients didn't wash for prolonged times. What effect would that have on a patient?
Firstly, some of the psychiatric illnesses, such as schizophrenia, may make patients to lack motivation. Part of the motivation is to wake up and take a bath. So if you are looking after the patients, you need to remind them to take a bath, to brush their teeth. Now, without such supervision, some of patients may not even bath, and without bathing, that is already poor hygiene. That one, you'll spread the infection to other people, but also you may end up with skin diseases. Assume if you're not brushing, probably not even brushing your teeth, dental caries. There could be some diseases related to not bathing for a prolonged period of time.
It's good for a human to have good
and
hygiene.
Also, you may not pick up little, if the patients are not bathing and no one is supervising, they may not pick up little injuries they may have had or little infections of the skin that you could treat early.
Thank you, Doctor. And we've dealt with this. I just want to finish on this lack of qualified staff for mental care health users. How will that affect them?
It depends on your support systems. I don't want to leave a message that you cannot have an NGO run by ordinary people in the
people from the street
in an area looking after a small number of patients with support from a neighboring clinic that is fully staffed. So I don't want to exclude that possibility. But if you're going to take a huge number, then you don't have support from the neighboring the clinics in the area, the health system in the area, then you probably definitely need occupational therapists, psychologists, social workers, and some kind of access to a doctor to review your medications.
Yes. Now, we've dealt with quite a number of things since yesterday. We talked about the lack of water, the lack of food, lack of appropriate clothing, lack of hygiene, trained persons. We talked about the lack of proper medicine or giving the wrong medicine. Now, on the survivors itself, all of those things combined, what effect would that have on the mental health care users?
It's a lot of things. There could be many effects, but I think overall there's a higher risk of relapse, deterioration of the mental illness, the mental illness getting worse. And we know that it's sometimes very difficult to, if a patient has been stabilized and then they relapse, it's sometimes very difficult, or it takes a long time to regain the previous functional level, especially with the patients with severe mental illnesses.
We've heard that you can have a natural relapse, but these are induced relapses, isn't it? Through bad care.
Yes, it sounds like these are induced relapses.
Thank you. Doctor, I just want to have your view on this. In terms of the Mental Health Care Act, the family member is included in the definition of a mental health care user. How do you handle that in your practice?
In terms of involving the family member?
Or in terms of informed consent? I'm not sure. If you could just say to us, how do you handle the family in terms of the definition of a healthcare user?
Okay. There's different, in the Mental Health Care Act, patients are divided into 3 levels. Yes. There's a voluntary mental health care user. That would be a person who is depressed or has whatever illness. They voluntarily present for treatment and admission. Those patients can sign themselves in without a problem. As part of treatment, we still consider a significant other important, whether it's a spouse, a parent.
So at all times, even with a voluntary patient, you consider it as a family treatment?
It's quite important, one, to get additional information on the patient, but also to us, it could be it's part of therapy, part of treating the patient, and also part of support for the patient, even for the voluntary patient. The assisted patient, which is the second level, and the involuntary patient, there you actually need family members, because for the assisted patients, you need the family members to apply for the patient to be assisted. And for involuntary patients, unless it's a special circumstance, you want the families to apply for the treatment. For the 2 types, obviously, because of the severity of the illness, you definitely need family members as you treat those 2 types of patients. It's very difficult to treat them without family members.
So what you're saying, firstly, in terms of treatment, it's necessary. then in terms of informed consent, the family member is also necessary.
Yes. It's not absolute. You can go without it, but
Yes.
it's the law sort of requires us to get hold of the family members and get them to apply.
And it seems to me it's something that you agree with, that the law should do that.
Yes, absolutely.
You promised a taxonomy of 3. You said first, voluntary mental health care user. What are the other categories?
Assisted mental health care user and involuntary mental health care user. But in my discussion, in terms of the role of the family, the assisted and the involuntary, I just combined them.
Yes.
And those definitions are in the Act.
They are in the Act.
So just to finish off that, the dynamic of a family assistance is overall very important with the mental health care user.
Yes, even the voluntary mental health care user. It's part of training of psychiatry.
Doctor, I just want to ask you a few questions about the typhoid.
Just before you move away from there, the consent requirement for mental health care users, how is that ordinarily dealt with? All of our patients with no mental disability, you presumably would require their consent, or in certain extreme circumstances, the consent of their family. But in the case of mental disability, how do you deal with and fulfill the consent requirement before you administer treatment?
The first category, which is voluntary, they consent for themselves because they've got capacity to consent. The assisted mental health care user will be someone, for instance, with dementia. He or she is not opposed to treatment, but he does not understand the treatment and therefore cannot consent. So the Act then prescribes that there must be an application made by family or anyone who has seen the patient to a head of health establishment that the patient must be treated. And then a doctor and another person who works in the health will assess the patient and decide whether the application is appropriate if the patient needs to be treated. And then they will then admit the patient for what is called 72-hour observation. So where then the clinical team will look after the patient, assess, and then at the end of that 72-hour observation, then a doctor and someone else, or a nurse, will reassess the patient and determine whether the patient still needs care or not. And then they will then all those forms of the application, they go to head of health establishment who approves, and eventually they end up with the review board. The difference between the assisted and involuntary is that with the involuntary, it will be someone who is opposed to, who is ill, does not see himself as ill and pose a danger to himself or others. And the similar process will be followed. And if at the end of the 72-hour observation, it's determined that the person is still ill and needs further care, and then that person will be transferred to a psychiatric hospital.
Now, in the case of patients who were kept at Esidimeni, well, let's for a moment talk about the 50 or so who had to be moved to Takalani. How would you deal with the consent requirement in that situation?
Firstly, they would have
Who
been...
has to be asked to agree for movement from Life Esidimeni to Takalani?
The families would be the first people to be asked because they would have been the ones who made the application in the first place if families are available. And where families are not available, I think the second option would be to get the authority of the head of health establishment.
ordinarily before you make a decision to transfer or discharge a patient, who is capable of understanding your communication to him or her? Would you ask the patient for consent?
Yes, if the patient can consent, the patient was admitted as a voluntary patient, then the patient can be discharged without consulting anyone. But my understanding of the Life Esidimeni patient, they would not have been admitted as voluntary patients.
They were admitted as what?
I would not know with certainty in all the details, but they're either assisted or involuntary. There's no way any of them would have been admitted as a voluntary patient.
So the patients there were generally assisted
or involuntary.
Yes.
It would make sense that we admit a voluntary patient.
And in that instance, whose consent do you have to procure?
Either the family or the head of health establishment, where the family is not available.
And how does preparation coincide, if at all, with consent? You talked a lot yesterday about preparing patients to be moved. Is preparation the same thing as consent or something different?
The Life Esidimeni is a special, unusual scenario. If ordinarily, if you're going to move the patient and the patient has family, the family would have been made aware of such a move. If we're moving one patient from a facility, whether the patient is admitted as involuntary or assisted, definitely where the family is available would have informed the family and got their agreement to the move of the patient. So if I were to move 50 patients to Takalani, I would consult the families, inform them that I'm going to move patients to Takalani. Apart from the consent, also you don't want families to be coming to your facility or searching for patients all over. That is actually bad care. You want them to know where their loved ones are.
Yes, but how do you? I get that, understand that that's part of the answer. But how do you prepare a patient in particular before you move the patient?
Not for, just don't get the question. You mean how do I prepare the patient psychologically?
How do you reduce the impact of movement from one facility to another?
Okay. Firstly, is preparation of the two facilities that are handling the patient. It's also communicating with the patient, even if you think that they don't understand. It's communicating with the patient directly that from this particular date, we'll be moving you to a particular date, to a particular institution. And you don't do that in one session unless you've got an emergency. You wouldn't do it in one session. You would have interviewed the patient, discussed with the patient. The psychologist, if you have one, would have included that as part of their therapy, even if you think that they do not understand you, because there may be certain things that the patients were used to in the facility. They should be aware now that they are moving to a different facility, to a different treating team. And this would apply even if you are sending them home. You would have to do some kind of psychotherapy to prepare them for a new facility.
So you need some psychotherapy that goes along with moving a patient from one place to another.
Absolutely, especially if they've been there for a long time. I'm not talking about an acute situation, especially if the patients have been there for a long time. Even in an acute situation, I must add, you would still, even in an aggressive patient, you still communicate with the patient and say, you are ill to this level, we are deciding to move you to this facility because we cannot contain you because you are breaking the windows in our facility.
Thank you, Justice. Doctor, if I could move on to LR 58, which you handed in yesterday, or was handed in the day before you came. It's about the Salmonella typhoid case. Yes. Now, as I read the timeline, in March 2016, you were upset about the 50 patients being moved to Takalani.
That's correct.
And if I could just then move a little bit on. this letter was, although it was written on the 19th of July, the cases presented itself in early July and late June. Would you agree with that?
That's correct, Council.
And we know from this letter, and you're not in disagreement with that, if I understand you correctly, that the incubation period would be 1 to 2 weeks.
Yes, that's correct, Council.
And it says that the illness could take 3 to 4 weeks to run its course.
Yes, that's correct, Council.
I know you're not the infectious diseases expert, but you're a medical doctor. You don't always die from this, is that right? You can survive this?
Yes, you can survive it, Council.
Now, if one go to the Ombuds report, the later report that he's handed in, and that will be LR 57, I don't think you have it in front of you. I just want to give you information on that. You don't have to go there. That in June, July, and August, that in the time of incubation, and that this was... Something went wrong here, sorry.
It's quite okay to give the doctor the report. Do you have it before you? Let somebody help you.
Thank you, Justice. Do you have it in front of you?
I have
You
it,
can
Council.
turn to page 8 of the report. See a graph of some sort. It says total death per facility. Then you have on your left-hand side the month
That's correct.
in the blue, and then the second institution is Moseko Takalani. Do you see that?
That's correct.
If you move down that column to June 2016, you see that 6 people have died at that institution, July 5 and August 5. It's
I
quite,
see that.
it's quite high, except for October, which is also, or any death is always unacceptable, but those are concentrated in those months. Do you see that?
Yeah, I see that, Council.
That could be as a result, I suppose, of the outbreak. Or you're not the pathologist, I know that as well.
Yeah. It's possible, but it was also winter months. There could also be other infectious diseases, especially respiratory infections, that could have caused the death as well.
Yes, I will accept that. Could you, in that, we looked at the symptoms of, in LR 58, and you agreed with the symptoms yesterday. That's on the first page, paragraph 2. It says poor appetite, headaches, generalized aches and pains, fever, lethargy, chest congestion develops, abdominal pain, and discomfort.
Yes, I agree.
Then if we turn the page to or 2 pages to page 3, we see that Johanna Kladley was vomiting blood-stained vomit. Would that be related?
Could be, but could be many other.
Could also be respiratory, because she had a runny nose.
Yeah.
And then, let me just get to the right place now. There was, if we turn 1 page back, on page 2, at the bottom of the page, just before the last heading, it refers to Excellence Nuzusa, and it says the skin was dehydrated, sunken eyes, and he was gasping for air. Would that be related? Could it be related?
That's a severely ill person. Could be related, could be from something else, but those are signs of someone who's physically severely ill. whether they had a diarrhea related to the typhoid, or they could have had something else that made them to be dehydrated.
The skin was dehydrated. Could you just explain that to us? Is there a change in skin color if it's dehydrated? It's loose.
The skin texture, if I were to use that, may change, or you may, when you pinch the skin, it may not, the elasticity may be lost.
I understand the elasticity. We all had babies and we all knew how to test those. But I specifically want to know about the skin color, whether that would change.
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure.
Thank you. We just in consult.
What are we doing here? We're trying to show that these people might have been killed by typhoid
Or dehydration.
or dehydration.
Yes. We've just heard evidence of people's skin color changing, and we've had consultations where that came out as well, and we can't make sense of it. Why would a person's skin tone change?
It could, I just don't want to commit myself without having refreshed my memory in checking the science, but I suspect, but I'm not certain, that the skin color with dehydration could change.
It could also be hygiene.
It could be hygiene, but there's a possibility that it could be dehydration itself.
Thank you.
And in this case, the dehydration could be due to typhoid, but could be also be due to many other causes.
Thank you,
Let me tell you what goes through my mind, Doctor, about the typhoid that you draw attention to and the time when it occurred. Given its gestation period up to its possible high point, the 2 months into June, July, shouldn't that have been a big alarm bell to all concerned and to the department to evacuate the people immediately?
It should have been justice, but at the time they ignored the deaths. I was already in the media in August of that year on ENCA, checkpoint, and on carte blanche. And the journalists were already asking me questions at the time.
In June, July 2016. You see the peak of, let me try and make the point again. If you look at Ella 57, there's Dr. Makhuba, the Ombuds additional report, which we had asked him to prepare after his initial evidence. You go back to the page that you are referred to and that graph, you'll see that the high point of deaths at Takalani May started 3, June 6, July 5, August 5, September 1 and October 6. You add those up, those are big numbers. Can you see them, Doc?
I see, Justice.
Yes. 9, 19, 20. We're talking 28 people more or less around that time. So it's quite a rump at that time. So I'm saying when the initial detection of typhoid was done, was there good reason to blow the whistle loud and say, is it medically sound to anticipate that there would be or should be an immediate evacuation from Takalani?
The department should have picked up as a warning, especially the type of infection that was suspected, being typhoid. That should have said to them, something wrong is going on in that institution. But I'm also adding that they ignored that warning that was within their system, but they also ignored warning outside, because I was interviewed by ENCA in July, and the journalists were telling me about people dying of this July the same year. Mm. So, and the MEC, the journalists also went to the MEC.
So you're saying there were a number of warnings out there. The one is the discovery of a risk of typhoid outbreak, and the other is you, for instance, going out there and being interviewed because journalists had already come to pick up that people were dying.
That's correct, Justice.
Yes. So you say there were enough signs out there for instance, Takalani in particular, to be evacuated or people to be moved there. Because you see, the death continues if you look at the schedule into October. You see that in October, in September, there's a little respite, but in October, another 6 people die. Can you see that?
I see.
So anytime from June, many people died. There was a peak. And it is that peak where nothing drastic was done to save those lives, it appears to me.
They should have seen that as a big warning sign, especially for the type of patients they were dealing with, and especially after the move. In fact, for any psychiatric facility to have 6 people out of 50 dying in 1 month should make you to be concerned and really investigate and do something.
And that number rises up to nearly, over 20, almost 29.
Which, if the total number was 50 that was moved, that's almost half of the people that were moved.
We don't know that.
Yes, because it is a 6 and a 5. In May, it's 3, that's 9, 10, 15, 21. By November, half the people nearly who were there had died. And lastly, do you think this report, LR58, if one looks at it, was compiled in July 2016, and it makes all these points about the conditions at Takalani, the pungent foul smell, the floors, the walls were clean, that's a good respite. But then there were not all of those things. Then you go to the kitchen, very dirty floor, poor illumination, poor housekeeping, and all of them. Very dirty hand washing basin, and so on it goes on. In July already, that report should have, aside from typhoid, should have got any authority to be concerned, isn't it?
It should have, Justice. There should have been concerned, even if the typhoid was not confirmed.
Yeah. Counsel?
Thank you, Justice Moseneke. My learned friend had taken you through that list, that assessment, so did Justice Moseneke just now. It's totally substandard. Do you agree?
Yes, it is. It is, especially for a health facility. In fact, even for one's house, but
yes,
for a health facility, it's substandard.
And I was just thinking, is this reckless? Is this uncaring? Is this incompetent? What leads to this in a hospital or in a facility?
I would say in a properly managed facility, it would be carelessness or in fact, recklessness. I would not see why would a health facility be like that and still accept patients.
As a clinician, if you saw this, you would have definitely not walked past it.
Absolutely not. I would have probably taken up with the management. It would have been drastic. We cannot have that in a health facility.
Yes. I'm very nearly finished with this report. One thing that stands out, stood out for me, is that the staff were advised, the staff and the carers, not to drink water other than from a treated source, and that they should monitor the mental health care users to only drink from a treated source. That's on page 4 of the document. Now, do you know whether that facility had treated water available, or would they only have tap water?
I'm not sure of those facts. I assume that they will have normal tap water that we all have.
So that instruction in the wrong hands could have led to more dehydration, I suppose, if there weren't bottled water available.
I would have assumed that, I hope that they actually just advise them to drink tap water, because our tap water is safe enough to drink, unless the facility didn't have tap water.
So why do you think then, if tap water is safe, why would that advice have been given?
I can't, it doesn't make sense to me.
Okay.
I don't know.
Doctor, if I'm very nearly finished with the questions that I'm posing to you, but I still have to deal with two issues. If I can ask you, how are we going to prevent this from happening again? What would your answer be to that?
As we all go into the future, I think the key, one of my thoughts into it is that what lacked in Life Esidimeni Marathon project was multi-stakeholder participation, because we don't all know everything. Even as I'm sitting here, I probably don't know how to run an NGO in detail, if we were to give it to myself. So I think if looking after patients with chronic mental illnesses, we need the treating doctors, the multidisciplinary team that is looking after the patient, to interact with the policymakers and the policy implementers, but also to interact with the NGOs. The solution to chronic mental illness and to illness is there in the policy. We need to develop community-based mental health care services. It's outlined in the policy framework. I think the provinces should interpret the policy framework and implement it. Then we'll be out of all these problems. But in an emergency where you want to close a facility, then all stakeholders should be brought in, and they should actually participate. So in a sense, I'm saying that we need stakeholder involvement if you are dealing with a crisis. Not one person must deal with it. But in terms of the general long-term of mental health in South Africa, it's articulated in the mental health policy framework, and it starts with strengthening the community-based mental health care services.
Yes, I'm going to ask you quite a lot about that still. So what you say is multidiscipline, engagement with stakeholders.
Absolutely. With not engaging to tick the box that you have engaged.
Yes.
Engaging meaningfully. And
not from a position of strength and power.
Yes.
As we've seen here. How do we make people in power listen? Do you know?
I mean, how do you make them to listen to us? We hope this will be a lesson for everyone in power to...
So we hope some memory banks will be laid down, and that will make them listen. Because they didn't listen to you. They didn't listen to the court cases that you were making. Isn't that so?
That's correct.
And how, Doctor, going forward, are we going to instill the correct ethics in the medical profession not to be part of something like this?
The medical profession in this situation, I think they were scared of government. There is...
I'm talking going forward. I hear that you say there might be reasons, but how are we going to make ethics the strong point of a medical practitioner?
But we need to deal with that fear. That fear that if something is happening, the government will issue a statement that employees are not supposed to talk to the media. That includes doctors. So there is fear that doctors work under, that they will be disciplined.
Yes, and we've seen that
so
in our history, yes.
So I think the doctors need to be empowered. They may know it theoretically, that they're supposed to stand up to government and stand for the patients, but in practice, they may not realize, they may not actually do it because out of fear. And I think for the doctors as well, they need to make use of the societies, the South African Medical Association, for instance, the psychiatrists, the South African Society of Psychiatrists, because it's easier, relatively easier, if you speak through your medical association than when you speak as an individual by yourself.
Are you not exposed to the extent that you would be as an individual?
Sorry, I didn't
You're
hear.
not exposed to the extent that you would have been as an individual.
Absolutely, and I've seen it as I've led the society and being the president of our society.
Just an observation, I heard what you said about the last court case and the sentiments that you've expressed. It would be a good day for our country when people defending court cases know that they are bound by the Constitution. Wouldn't that be so?
That's correct, Council.
And that's Section 8 of our Constitution that says you are bound, but sometimes in court cases something goes wrong, like in your March court case.
That's correct, Council.
I want to speak to you a little bit about policy now, which you've raised, and the deinstitutionalization. It is so that the World Health Organization and the international obligations is moving away from institutionalization to deinstitutionalization. And we think it's a 2030 plan that says hopefully that would be over by then. It's a lofty goal. But can I just ask you this document that you've just handed in, LR 59. Those are the 900 beds letter.
That's correct.
And interestingly enough, I see at a cost, paragraph 7, the last page, a budgeting cost of 20 million rand for this financial year. That was 2016. For planning and carrying out mandatory investigations on identifying properties and so forth. So it's not even the building at 20 million rand. But can I let us just put this LR 59 in perspective. It's signed by the person that prepared it, O.L. Molotsi, on 9 November 2016, and the head of the department, Dr. Silabanu, approved it on the 11th of November 2016. You know the timeline, but I just want to put it in perspective. At that stage, there's already been deaths. The Life Esidimeni project, the marathon project is run. The Umbut is in the middle or very close to the end of his investigation. Do you agree with that?
That's correct.
That's the time period that this brilliant letter is written.
That's correct, Council.
And does this letter at all comply with the international obligation to deinstitutionalize?
It does not even comply with our own policy framework. It's actually a deviation from it.
Because we say we're not going to spend money on institutions further.
It also does not comply with what the MEC had said is the reason for cancelling the contract with Life Esidimeni. So it's a deviation from anything that we know. And 900 beds, if I were to put it in context, that is bigger than Stekfontein Hospital today. Stekfontein is between 600 and 800 beds. So 900 beds would be a hospital bigger than Stekfontein Hospital.
I want to make this statement and I want to hear your view on this. This is not in terms of policy, but is it not an indication of lack of leadership and lack of implementation of policy?
I think it goes beyond. It's lack of appreciation, a lack of understanding of policy. Because all the three hospitals, Tara Hospital, Stekfontein and Vescopis, are far removed from the bigger population, especially the poor population. And even if you were to say you're going to build it in Orange Farm, it will still be too big for one population, one community.
So it just doesn't make sense on any level.
It doesn't make sense.
At a huge cost.
It would have cost them a lot if they went ahead with it.
But the intriguing thing here is, and by here I mean LR 59, it proposes that 2016, the remainder of 2016, 2017, and 2017, 2018, 20 million rand should be used for planning.
That's correct, Justice.
And this is said, as Council has pointed out, in November 2016. And then nearly 80, possibly to 90% of the people we are concerned with here had died.
That's correct.
So this plan was not directed at dealing with Esidimeni marathon plan, was it?
I don't think it was designed to deal with Life Esidimeni, but I think the authorities were aware of the consequences of closing Life Esidimeni, that you'll then still need beds, but they were going about it the wrong way.
And you say, to Council's question, this was opposite to the target of deinstitutionalization.
It was opposite to that, and it was opposite to what the policy prescribed.
And in the end, the recommendation seems to acknowledge that there will be a lot of work still to be done. The 20 million would just be to get a project plan going.
That's correct, Justice.
And all of those things, 8.1 to 8.5, were yet to be worked out. So when the marathon project was taken over, there were no 900 beds in sight.
No, Justice, there were no additional beds. There were no 900 beds.
Just the last question on that for me is, have we ever in the past had a complete closure of a mental health care facility? I'm not talking about transfers from one point to the other, one facility to the other, where there's a complete closure with patients in the order of around 1,000, just over 1,700. Which other facility has been closed down like this?
I'm not aware of one that has been closed down in this manner, but there are facilities that have been, where patients have been gradually deinstitutionalized. Either the facilities became smaller or the facilities were closed. For instance, I think there used to be mill site in Gauteng that is no longer operational. I'm not aware of one that was just closed in a 3-month period. But there are facilities that have been gradually reduced in size in terms of the chronic patients.
But you don't know of any of this magnitude?
To my knowledge, it could have been there, but to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any other facility that has been closed in this
You see, that goes to the multidisciplinary task team you said was necessary. So I was trying to understand whether we had done this before. By we, I mean the department, and whether there was project management skills to do something of this magnitude.
That's correct, Justice. But also, it would not be necessary to close an institution like that. I cannot see why anyone would close a facility in that manner. Why would you create stress to the system unnecessarily?
Council?
Thank you, Justice. If I can speak to you a little bit further about deinstitutionalization, it seems to me the policy is accepted. That's the way that everybody wants to go. Do you agree with that?
I agree, but it's
Yes.
not a policy that has no problems.
Yes. And the Health Ombud said this is going to be more expensive than institutionalization. Do you agree with that?
It's cheaper to institutionalize.
Yes. So if we're going to reach this goal, would you agree that it would be imperative for a community-level health services to be developed?
Absolutely, and that doesn't. It's not easy to do that in terms of time, human resource, and money.
Yes, and Professor Makabe actually said that in his report. It said that mental health services must be developed in the community. So it's a logical thing that must happen.
That's correct.
And the Health Ombud also said for this capacity to be developed, there need to be appropriate self-help, peer-led services, for example, community health workers. Would you agree with that?
That's correct.
And we don't have those at the moment. Do you agree?
No, we don't have.
Yes. In terms of the Health Professions Council of South Africa, they have a description which they recognize as mental health assistance. Are you aware of that description in the documents? They recognize mental health assistance.
No, I'm not aware of them,
Okay.
especially coming from
Where does
them.
one find that, Council? Is there a reference for that?
It's not in the documents before us. I will ensure that this be placed before the court.
Okay.
According to the Health Professionals Council of South Africa, these professionals should be working on policy development, program design, identification of mental health problems, guidance for wellness options, as well as social support structures and resources. And their responsibilities will be augmented with the registered counsellors. Does that ring a bell at all?
I can see it done in other countries, but not to my knowledge in our country.
Okay. One of the things that the Ombud lifted out is that because there's no community care, it's difficult to have a mental health care user go home because there's no support. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
So I want to take it just a little bit further. If there were this grouping of people that could fulfill this role, that the care of the survivors and the inhumane treatment of these patients might have been avoided if there were more people, more feet on the ground.
I don't say specifically the ones you are mentioning, but if there was a better community-based care with human resource, some of the patients could be discharged to a supportive community with those kind of facilities and that kind of human resource.
Now, in terms of your national mental health policy framework and statutory plan for 2013-2020, there are no recognition of such a group of people doing this type of work. Are you aware of that?
I don't remember them from the policy.
Yes, it's not there.
Yeah.
The mental health assistant is not in the policy.
I don't think so.
Yes.
I'm quite confused, Council.
I hope
I thought the initial proposition was that
there is
somewhere there's a policy that envisages community mental health care assistance.
Maybe I should just, I'll try to make this a little bit clearer, Justice, and I apologize for the confusion. In the Health Professions Council of South Africa, there is such a profession mentioned, but it doesn't feature in the department's plan at all. That's the proposition that I put to you.
I don't
The
know
Health
when
Professions Council of South Africa
Yeah.
has documentation, policy documentation
Of a
that refers
profession called the mental health assistant.
a profession called mental health assistant. Thank you.
But the policy and the policy framework and the strategic plan, there's nothing of such a person in that.
I don't know when the Health Professions Council made that documentation and profession, but chances are they did not bring that to the discussions that developed the policy.
And
I don't think, and also I don't think to be a big limitation, because as we translate the policy into our provinces, we could incorporate a lot of other.
Well, there are two questions in essence. Do you know whether or not the Health Professions Council of South Africa has a profession which deals with mental health care assistance?
No, I was not aware of that.
You're not aware of that. The second part is, if so, if you accept that there is such a profession envisaged, do you know whether it has been built into the policy framework
Because I've read the
for
policy.
community mental health care?
Because I've read the policy framework, I don't think it's included in the policy framework.
Thank you. And that absence in the framework and in the minds of professionals, I think, has gone over to our universities. Because we, in terms of documentation, which I hope to provide, there's about 6,000 psychological, let me just get the right pronunciation here, psychology students with honors that finishes university every year. Would you agree with that number, just as a ballpark?
I'm not sure of the exact number, but there is a lot of psychology students who finish every year.
And some of them go on to do a master's degree. And they then can enter through that door. But the people with just an honors degree, there's very few job opportunities for them. Would you agree?
I'm not sure, but there are job opportunities.
Yes, but they're not, for
You're
instance...
going to give us this statistical platform at some stage,
At
you?
some stage,
Yeah.
yes, Justice. They don't qualify as mental health assistants at all. Because I want to say to you, because what they need is a tertiary education, and even if they have this honors degree, there's only 2 tertiary education institutions in South Africa that are private institutions that gives this training. And they will have to redo their first 4 years. So there's a bulk of students, this is my submission to you, that is in South Africa, that can help, but they're nowhere recognized. And they can't study at private institutions because the costs are just so very, very high.
The long and the short of the proposition is that we have university graduates at honors level in psychology who usefully could practice the profession of community healthcare assistants. One, do you know if they exist? You've already said no. 2, do you agree with the proposition that that would be useful to have a profession like that who work in the community?
I think any help would be useful, but I think that would have to be discussed with the Department of Health and the Health Professions Council.
Is the Health Commission, the Health Professions Council of South Africa have an exam for these people after they finish in the private institutions, and they must also do a 720-hour internship. But this is not open to the university graduates. They need to do the private institution first. So the proposition that I'm putting to you is there's not sufficient talk between the universities that offer degrees and the Medical Health Council, Professional Council, and the departments to use our resources properly. What would you say?
Is this an appropriate witness to to deal with that issue?
He
Answer
is-
that question.
He is in the mental health field, so he would know whether these people could be of assistance.
Well, Council has already told us that he is not aware of the existence of the profession, but any help will help.
Justice, I will then just leave that there for the
Yes.
moment. Thank you.
It's a useful line of inquiry, which I would like to hear more about, because it comes to and speaks to the future.
Yes.
How do we prevent this in the future? And if you're serious about deinstitutionalization, you're going to need the human resource
Absolutely, Justice.
to be able to look after people properly. So it's a very valuable part of the inquiry. I just don't know whether Dr. Tala-tala can help you.
Yes. I hope in his professional organization he will look into the things that I've put into him, and from their side they will do something about this.
Yes.
Thank you. Justice, I am finished with my cross-examination, Doctor.
And a few chief honchos will be coming. You can put that to them.
Thank you,
To
Justice.
control health in the province.
Thank you. Doctor, I just from our side want to thank you for doing what you've done and being a role model for younger doctors. And we just want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Justice.
Thank you, Counsel. Advocate Groenewald.
Thank you, Justice. Doctor, we only have a few questions for you. I want to start off with your testimony of yesterday. Well, it's common cause, and we all know that you lost that urgent application in March of 2016, which, if it turned out differently, might have saved a lot of lives. But your reaction to the question from my colleague from Section 2017 was, yes, we lost it because they lied. I want to know, who are they?
The Department of Health,
Yes.
through their advocate.
But he argues on papers. So I don't want to speculate. If you can, I want to know whether or not you can refer us to an affidavit of the MEC or Dr. Manamela or the HOD, because your argument was quite specific. You said that they argued and said that the patients which were discharged from Life Esidimeni, they were fine. They were now fine, and they were discharged in the sense that they are not ill anymore. Am I correct?
Yes, that's what I heard in court. And I think the judgment itself does comment on that as well.
Okay. But you cannot provide us specifically with an affidavit per se that states that.
Not
I don't want you to speculate. I just want to, if you have the facts, I would really like to have it.
I wouldn't have it with me here, but if you were to go to the judgment itself, or even the court recording, the recordings of the court, you'll find that.
Okay, but according to you, the argument from government was that these patients, they are fine, they are not ill anymore, they are being discharged
Yes, they are being discharged by the doctors.
by the doctors.
Yes.
And that's quite a huge misrepresentation, am I correct?
Now that we've seen the patients, yes.
Yes, because you know, and you also testified that this was severely ill patients. Those were your words, am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay, but you cannot assist us further on that specific topic.
But you can find the records of the court.
Okay. No.
I wouldn't have it with me here.
We will do that. We will make that effort, because I think it's quite a very important point in light of the consequences of this mental health project.
Advocate Groenewald, would you
Yes.
pause for a while?
I will do.
Counsel?
Oh,
Maybe some assistance coming your way.
thank you very much, Justice.
Precisely that, Justice Masineke. To assist my colleague, the transcript of the hearing, the papers in the case, the affidavits are in file 2, and the actual transcript of the exchange that took place in court is to be found at page 873 of file 2.
Well, you've got fodder for the meal. I know you need this for cross-examination.
Indeed, sir.
Now you know where to find your references.
Indeed, sir, Justice. No,
Thank
we'll
you,
do so.
Counsel. You may proceed.
Thank you, Justice. Then, sir, you were asked by Justice Moseneke, why do you think all these people ignored you? And your response was, well, there were multiple reasons. And you referred to the fact that history had shown that the department doesn't listen to clinicians and so on. But then you made mention of an incident and your words were that the head of the department or someone told you or presented to you that the province are getting rid of mental health care users. But you were interrupted and you couldn't finish that. Can you recall that?
Yes, I recall. Not the mental health care users.
Oh.
Where a meeting in Midrand of psychiatrists in Gauteng, and the head of health was presenting, and they said they wanted to get rid of service contractors, service providers, like their contract with cell phone, their contract with Life Esidimeni. So that's what they want. As part of their management of their finances, they wanted to do away with those kind of arrangements.
Okay, so the strategy was that we don't want to outsource anymore.
That's correct.
Okay, so then just lastly, I mean, you foresaw the consequences. You warned the department. You wrote letters. You argued it during consultations. You went to court twice. At the end of the day, they didn't listen to you. All I want to know from you is, do you agree with me that any reasonable person should have and must have foreseen the drastic consequences of this mental health project?
I think they should have, any reasonable person who should have foreseen it, especially with the advice. Without advice, without support and advice from the professions, maybe a person who's not trained in mental health or in health may have made mistakes. But with the advice that was provided, they should have, any reasonable person should have foreseen.
The witness is in fact, counsel, saying to you that you ought to formulate the test, the legal standard. Any reasonable decision maker in the same position as the HOD or the MEC or the head of the mental health care should have reasonably foreseen these adverse consequences, isn't it?
Indeed, sir, Justice.
Many reasonable persons may not be able to anticipate it, but the target group, the decision makers here, skilled presumably in their task, should have reasonably anticipated that these dire consequences would follow. I wonder what you say to that, Doc.
Justice, any person working in the Department of Health at the level of the MEC head of health, with the additional support that they have, they should have foreseen it, even if they are not medically trained.
Yes. And let alone those who were medically trained and who were also administrators. They, in a fortiori case, I mean, they even more so should have anticipated the disaster.
The ones who are medically trained should have anticipated it from the administration point of view, but also from the medical training. The medical training itself should have taught them that problems would happen with the move.
Yes. Thank you, Justice.
You may proceed, Counsel.
Mr. Mosenoge, who was the project leader, in his closing arguments or submissions, he said that politicians should rather play an overview role, and people that gets appointed should have the necessary skills to do the job. Now, I would just like to know from you, are you in agreement with that submission? And to what extent can you say that politicians should not give instructions to clinicians on issues of health and health care?
I think politicians, I agree with him that the politicians should play an oversight role, but the people actually appointed to do the job, whether it's a head of health or it's a doctor on the ground, they should be given space to actually execute their job. In fact, there should be space for them to, in fact, to be healthy for our country, if the people on the ground, there's a sort of, they're allowed to do their work, and there's sort of debate between them and the politicians on the directions. But I'm saying that the politicians may say that maybe we're going to spend too much money on a project, we, the doctors on the ground. Then there should be a debate between us and the politicians whether that injection is a good injection to have despite the cost. You know? So there should be a healthy debate. Politicians should do an oversight. The people employed with the job should do the job, and there should be a healthy debate between the two.
And that's exactly the problem that we had here, because we had a dictator almost who didn't want to listen to any of the organizations, and who didn't want to sit down and give you an opportunity to state your case and to warn them.
I agree with you, Council, and I think the senior people at the department did not even listen to the junior people within the department, and the junior people worked with fear. They did their work with fear.
Thank you very much, Doctor, and thank you for your good work. Thank you very much, Justice.
Thanks.
Thank you, Council. Advocate Nguchana.
Thank you, Justice Moseneke. Just one item. There is one topic to find out from you. You have been asked by earlier on about the ethics of the clinicians who were involved in this matter. And you had just now been referred back to the issue whether somebody else had lied in the manner in which the project was implemented. And I do know that you had deposed to an affidavit prior to the application you referred to that you had lost somewhere in March 2016. There was an affidavit you deposed to in 2015. Do you still recall that?
So I didn't get that.
An affidavit that you deposed to in 2015.
That's correct.
And that was in support of an application that was brought by you in December 2015.
That's correct.
You still recall that?
Yes.
And the main application, that is the main affidavit was deposed to by your colleague, Casey
Chambers.
Chambers, yes. And you were simply confirming that is the conditions at the mental hospital as you knew them from your own experience.
I wouldn't remember all the details
Yes.
in the affidavit.
And in fact, the affidavit, when I read through it, it reads the same way as your report on page 3548. The contents are the same.
Yeah, give the witness the advantage of the record.
The record is on
If it's part of the record, you can as well see it. Yeah.
It's page, that is page 3548, volume 11.
Yes, could that be given to Dr. Tala-tala? fact, both
And
the volumes.
Can I
and then
request?
the questions can be posted.
Yes. Can I request that you be given another bundle? That is one. Are you there?
Yes.
And your affidavit on page that is in volume 1 is on page so as to refresh your memory on 338. Volume 1, 338.
Yeah, I've got 338.
Yes. On 338, specifically on page 334, your paragraph 27, yeah. Page 338.
Paragraph
No, I'm sorry. It's 344 on volume 1.
3, 4.
Are you there?
That's correct.
Yeah, one of the issues, and this came up as well in, I think from one of the questions by Justice Msaneke, that you note there that SASOP's correspondence with the Gauteng Department of Health on this issue, SASOP concerns about the discharge of all patients from Life Esidimeni facilities stems largely from concerns about the adequacy of care at alternative facilities or in communities given the care needs of mental health care users of Life Esidimeni. In this part, I lay out in more detail and from personal experience the reasons for this concern. Do you still recall this?
Yeah, I see that.
Yes. So you laid out your concerns to the department in 2015, December 2015.
Yes.
That from your own experience, these NGOs are completely inadequate to care for these mental health care users.
That's correct.
Yes. And
Council, can we record that this is a press release, is it?
press release. What page is that, Justice Msaneke?
You referred me to 334, is it? Or do I have it wrong?
I think
In
you have
volume
it-
1?
No, I think you have it wrong. It's
Yes.
338.
Thank
That's
you.
his affidavit.
I see. Okay, I've got that.
Yeah, the specific passage I have requested him to go to, it's on page 344,
Yes.
paragraph 27. It relates to the concerns which he had raised.
Yes, you go ahead with the question. I've got it now. Thank you.
And those are the concerns you had raised, and in the following paragraphs, specifically in paragraph 29, 28, and so on, you set out all which you had set out in the, that is in your report.
Okay, yes.
Yes. And what I want to find out from you is the following. There was a response to that affidavit by Dr. Dr. Libeta. Yes, it's Dr. Libeta, who is employed by the department. And I want to find out the ethical duties of Dr. Libeta. What was he required as a medical doctor to disclose before court for purpose of this litigation?
Will you take us to Dr. Libeta's response?
And
And in particular to paragraphs 27, 28,
Yes.
and 29?
no, don't rush. I'll take you there. No, I'll take you there. On page 404, that is where the affidavit of Dr. Libeta starts. Are you there?
Yes.
Yes. Then the specific passage, the first one that I want to take you to, before I deal with a response to your paragraph 27, is on page 418 of that affidavit. Are you there?
Yes.
Yeah, you see there on page 50, that is paragraph 56, Dr. Libeta responds to the main affidavit that it is totally irresponsible for Chambers under oath to state that the healthcare facilities and NGOs to which users are scheduled to be discharged do not have the capacity to accommodate them. Chambers does not mention which of these facilities these are intended for transfer of the users. Did this accord with your knowledge then about these NGOs that they, as it is indicated there, that they have such capacity to take care of these mental users?
Yes, even at the time I was of the opinion that the established NGOs would not, through my experience, would not have capacity to look after the Life Esidimeni patients, partly because of the number of beds available and my experience of them returning those patients to me when I worked at Stekfontein, and me then having sent them to Life Esidimeni.
Yes. And what were the responsibilities of Dr. Libeta then ethically?
Well,
Just before you walk away there, I mean to make the point, and thank you for referring us to this, Council. Dr. Libeta is unhappy that Dr. Chambers, under oath, had stated that the healthcare facilities and NGOs to which users are scheduled to be discharged do not have the capacity to accommodate them. So he actually says, in effect, he says, when Dr. Chambers says that, he is in fact being untruthful, because he says this under oath, and yet he does not mention which of these facilities are intended for transfer of users. So he refutes the notion that these NGOs do not have the capacity to accommodate them. Well, what do you say to that, to that response?
yes, Ms. Chambers was correct in her affidavit to say that the...
Is it Ms. Chambers?
It's Ms. Chambers.
Yes,
Ms.
okay.
She was correct to, in her view, and I agree with her, that the facilities, even the established one, didn't have capacity to accommodate the patient. We knew of the numbers. The department was not cooperative to tell us exactly where they're going to put. So we were commenting on the NGOs that we know of. We assumed that they'll use the NGOs that are available in Gauteng that we know of. So, but they didn't tell us the exact facilities. So, based on the knowledge that we have about the facilities, Ms. Chambers was correct to say that the facilities won't be able to accommodate those patients, Life Esidimeni patients. And actually, Dr. Libeta was incorrect to say that Ms. Chambers was lying.
You may proceed, Councillor.
Yes. And in fact, before that, evidence was referred to Dr. Libeta or the department of the fact that there is no such capacity that the department has to accommodate all these mental health care users. And I want to refer you to the specific passages of it. That appears on page 156 of the same bundle.
I'm not sure what you're going to show us now, Council.
No, the capacity of that is the department had, I think, at the time.
Yeah,
Are you there?
Yes.
So, in response to a question in the legislature, the MEC, Ms. Masang, at the bottom there, that is under Roman figure 4, to the question.
Bottom of page 156.
156. Approximately how many of the 2,000 patients currently at Life Health Care Esidimeni are assessed as requiring long-term care and supervision in a protected environment? Then she records 1,671 need long-term care, which can be provided at the NGOs and home. NGOs will accommodate 113 patients that need medium-term care, but are categorized as high-level functioning patients. Only 50 users will be discharged home. And on top of that is under Roman figure 3, she lists that is the capacity for each of the institutions there. That is the first one, Vescopies 416 and so on. And the total number
Take them in small bits. Remember, you have a witness.
Yes.
And you'd like to extract something from the witness to confirm or to contest.
Yes.
Can you keep it short? And then we can go to the additional part. What do you want from the witness under Roman 4?
Under Roman 4, that is the number 1671. Did this accord with your experience that these long-term care users from Life Esidimeni would be taken care of at NGOs and homes?
I didn't agree with that. I didn't think that they could be taken care of in NGOs.
And what do you say about the number 1,671? Was that possible?
I didn't think that the NGOs would have that capacity, that number of our available NGOs wouldn't be able to accommodate that big number of patients.
And specifically on that it wouldn't be possible for the NGO to take care of that. Let's look at the column that is under Roman figure 3. And do you see the capacity of the estimated capacity of NGOs there against that number 1,671?
Yes, I see that.
And what is the capacity of the NGOs there?
The facilities listed are not all NGOs.
Yes.
The facilities in the list.
That is for NGOs, the last two columns. Existing NGOs, vacant beds, 214.
14 plus 377.
Additional NGO beds, 377.
Yes.
That number does not even make half of the 1,671.
That's correct, Council.
Do you agree with me?
I agree, Council.
So the answer
What is the point, Council? You're saying on the face of this response,
yes,
the contents of Roman 4 is inconsistent with the contents of Roman 3.
correct. It's completely, at face value, it's completely inconsistent.
Yeah, I hear the point.
Are you there? And not on
Comment on that, Council. All this is directed at you. Notionally, you the witness, so there must be a question that flows every time you are referred to some document. You see the discrepancy.
Yes, yes, Council, there is a
Yeah.
discrepancy.
In the one instance, she says that she talks about 1,671, and when you add those give you no more than 591. So Council says there's a discrepancy there, and whether you agree that there is a discrepancy.
There is discrepancy, but at the time we're dealing with Life Esidimeni, it was quite common for the department to give different figures for different things. That number is not even the number that was eventually discharged from Life Esidimeni, as you can notice. So it was quite common for them to give us different figures at different times.
yes.
But the other thing also is that, strikingly, did any of the Life Esidimeni people go to these other institutions in the initial part of the marathon project? Vescopies and Sterkfontein and Cullinan? Or are these simply numbers of beds available?
Justice, there were, I can't remember exactly at what stage, there were patients that were eventually moved to Sterkfontein. Some of them were being, before the investigation, before the ombudsman intervened, there were patients where, when the media started making noise, there were patients that would be moved from one NGO, for instance, to Sterkfontein Hospital. So there were patients that were eventually accommodated at Sterkfontein, I know that, and I think at Vescopies as well.
You see, under 2, the question was, what are the identified hospitals or premises where they will be placed. Then the answer comes Weskoppies, Sterkfontein, Kalinin Care, unused part of Tshwane District Hospital, Transvaal Memorial Institution, Pienaar and Old Germiston Hospital, and then existing NGOs. And then 3, how many beds will be available for them at each hospital or premise, which is a follow-up from 2, and then that breakdown is given. But the evidence up to now did not suggest that there were 416 people who left from Life Esidimeni to Weskoppies, or 230, or to Kalinin Care 148, or Tshwane District Hospital, and so on. Do you have any comments about that? Do you know anything about that? If you don't, it's understandable.
Yeah, I don't know what was the number of patients that were eventually moved to those hospitals, but as I know, Sterkfontein Hospital, it would not ordinarily have 230 available beds. And I did raise that in our meeting when we were still after the first court case, because Sterkfontein Hospital had wards that were told that they were no longer good for use, for human use, and they were closed down. So I was even scared that if you say Sterkfontein has got additional beds, then patients would then be moved to those beds, to those wards that were closed down when I was working there because they were thought to be dangerous.
Okay, Council.
Yes. And in fact, those answers are dated 18 November 2015. And on 26 November, that is the same month, a response comes that is from the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, and it's on page 169. And specifically, let's go to page 172. The paragraph there is 11.4. At the end of, a reference is made to the MEC's response on page 156. And in fact, it says, the Life Esidimeni termination project plan provides for the renovation of identified units in the specialized hospitals. No timeline is given for this renovation. In addition, in the response to the legislature question 5, HLO 143, that refers to the MEC's responses I have taken you through. A number of specialized hospital beds are listed, the 416 for Weskoppies and so on. The number of beds available in each hospital, according to the response, is in the second column. We have been in touch with hospital managers and CEOs at these facilities. The information that we have received is reflected in the third column. So this is a response now to the suggestion that there is that capacity available at those institutions. Then
well, we have to take the witness through it properly, Counsel, shouldn't we?
Yes.
Is he aware of this letter? Does he know of it? Has he seen it before?
No, I'm not sure whether he knows about this
let's
letter.
do that. Let's deem that.
Have you seen this? Have you
I
seen
think
this?
you went right to the heart of the letter. Yeah, okay.
Yes. Have you seen this letter before?
I wouldn't remember.
Yes.
I don't remember Council, that.
It's part of the annexures to your application.
Yes.
Yeah.
I may have been copied by.
No, yeah, it's fine. I've assumed that you don't know
But
this
in the
letter.
application, he filed a confirmatory affidavit. Isn't
Correct,
it?
correct.
All right. So we have to take him gently through that. And this was attached to the main affidavit, isn't it?
Correct. And then on page 153, that is the following pages, the specific responses. In relation to Weskoppies Hospital, the 416, the response there is that the hospital is currently full. Do you see that? Will that accord with your knowledge then?
Yes, definitely for our hospitals. I would understand if Weskoppies would say that they are full.
Then Sterkfontein as well, the hospital is currently full. Will that be in accordance with what we had known then?
That I know for Stikfontein, and it's been like that for years.
Yeah.
So that's why I said I would be surprised that Stikfontein would say they've got beds, unless you're going to use the dilapidated, closed-down wards.
Yes. Then the next one is Cullinan. The facility wards are empty but have previously closed due to health and safety concerns and require significant renovation and cannot currently accommodate any patients. You would know anything about this?
I'm not familiar with Cullinan.
Yes, evidence has been laid about the fact that they were renovated previously, so don't know about that. Then the next one is Swane District Hospital. And again, the response there is the psychiatric patients in this facility are in general wards and there is no dedicated psychiatric ward. Do you have any knowledge of this?
I'm also not familiar. I would expect Tshwane, because of its level of care,
Yes.
to accommodate psychiatry patients in the way they've described.
Yes.
But I've not worked there myself.
So, in short, those were the responses to the available beds. But despite that, then the following month we have Dr. Libert denying to a vehemence that that is indeed the current condition then. Do you still recall my reference to Dr. Libert's affidavit where he says that, no, Chambers, you are wrong by stating that we don't have this capacity?
Dr. Libert was incorrect
Yes.
in his view.
Correct. So, then, now let me take you to the response to your paragraph 27. You had...
Well, there's no intended to go to your regional council.
yes.
We never quite got there, did we?
A response to your paragraph 27. Yes.
Where was, I can't remember where it was.
No. I'll take you to it. It's on page 435. It's on 435 paragraphs 165 to 170. And Dr. Liberta says, I deny the correctness of these allegations. That is your paragraph 27. In particular, Tala-tala does not know which facilities the users will be transferred to. To call them inadequate is an uninformed opinion. It is a common cause that NGO facilities do not deal with acute patients. It is also common cause that no discharge of a user is possible without the decision of a multidisciplinary team. Annexure L2 shows the staff component working. There is only one medical officer indicated in table 22 of that annexure. I concede intervention by psychiatric doctors may be required in those instances a psychiatric is engaged. You see that?
I see.
So, Dr. Libert in December 2015 says that your vehemence that that is from your experiences, the NGOs would not be capable to take care of that. Was incorrect as a matter of fact.
Dr. Libert was incorrect in his opinion, or in his affidavit.
Yeah.
Probably he didn't know the work that I'd done.
Yeah. And from your ethical point of view, what were the responsibilities of Dr. Libert?
Well, he should have, in my view, he should have established the facts and established the facts correctly. No matter what action was going to be taken, but it should be taken with correct facts because the practice of medicine itself relies on truth. Truth is a key ingredient of the practice of medicine. So even if we're going to do something not desirable, we're going to switch off the life support, but we still need to tell the truth. So he deviated from that.
Yes. And somewhere in his affidavit, he makes reference to the fact that there is no intention to discharge acute users, but the intention was to discharge chronic users. Will that also be correct as a matter of fact?
Well, the patients at Life Esidimeni would be described as chronic patients.
With chronic patients?
Chronic patients.
Yes. Okay.
And at the time, he was the acting head of Department of Health in Gauteng. He says so in his affidavit that Libete was the acting head of the Department of Health in Gauteng.
I wouldn't be sure, Justice.
You wouldn't be sure about his title
but at the time,
time,
I think he was the deputy to the head of health.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's tea time. I think we would like to take the adjournment now and resume at 12. If you have any more questions, you can continue then, Council.
No questions.
No further questions.
Yes.
Very well. When we come back, then we'll go to the state and then followed by re-examination.